equally ill formulated. You have no idea what you're talking about. The idea that my comments had anything to do with the hypothetical rise in suicide rates among transgender people is preposterous, and there's also no evidence whatsoever that those suicide rates that you're describing are a consequence of any attitude whatsoever towards their hypothetically transgender status.
Lack of social acceptance, which is definitely cultivated by comments like yours that deny the existence of trans people.
What makes you think you know what you're talking about?
You talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
You think before you act, you decrease the probability that you'll do something cataclysmically stupid. So that's the issue. That's why you want your thought criticized, because if you have a stupid idea and you act it out, then terrible things will happen.
Every time Jordan Peterson steps onto a stage, it's like lighting a match in a room full of gas. The questions come charged with ideology, sharpened with moral outrage, and usually delivered by young voices who are convinced they've caught him cornered. They call him outdated, accuse him of fueling hate, or dismiss his ideas as banal self-help. But time and again, what starts as a confident takedown attempt turns into something else. The accuser stumbling, and Peterson dismantling their arguments piece by piece.
My question is in regards to a comment you made on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple years prior, where you called being transgender a sociological contagion and compared trans people to Satanists.
This was the point in the Oxford Union debate where the temperature spiked. Up until then, questions had been probing, even sharp, but still tethered to ideas. Then came the student who stood up with a preloaded accusation. She didn't ask Peterson to clarify. She didn't even argue from her own position. She framed him as a villain from the start. And guess what? The charge was heavy.
Satanists?
No, I don't think so.
You called being transgender equivalent to participating in satanic rituals in the 1980s. This is a quote.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
You called being transgender and you compared that to satanic rituals that occurred in daycares in the 90s.
You could hear the audience stiffen, because honesty, that was not a question. That was a bomb lobbed at reputation.
Oh, I see. So that's very different than the proposition that you laid before me.
Right. You do have a history of intense anti-trans comments, so I wanted to question you on that. In the United States, trans youth have the highest rates of suicide among any demographic. How do you respond to those who believe your comments have cultivated a climate of hostility against trans people and contributed to this alarming rise in suicide rates?
Okay, so first of all, I respond to them like I responded to you by pointing out the falsehood of their question.
Peterson doesn't do what most professors would do in that situation: backpedal, soften, or apologize. Instead, he goes straight for the weak plank, holding her entire argument together, pointing out that she misrepresented what he actually said.
Me had absolutely nothing to do with what I said, as you well knew. And the moralizing And the moralizing element of your accusation that constituted the last half of your question is also equally ill formulated. You have no idea what you're talking about.
That distinction matters. If someone twists your words into a grotesque caricature, the conversation can't move forward honestly. He calls it for what it is: moralizing masquerading as inquiry.
The idea that my comments had anything to do with the hypothetical rise in suicide rates among transgender people is preposterous, and there's also no evidence whatsoever that those suicide rates that you're describing are a consequence of any attitude whatsoever towards their hypothetically.
The intensity in his tone turns from just defense to offense when she insists that his past words have fueled suicide rates among trans youth. Peterson dismantles it with brutal directness. He doesn't deny the tragedy of suicide. He denies the lazy leap of logic that pins those deaths on him personally. That's not just unfair, it's unprovable. And in a debate setting, that matters. If you let the emotional weight of tragedy override the demand for evidence, you've already lost the ground rules of reason.
Social acceptance, which is definitely cultivated by comments like yours that deny the existence of trans people.
What makes you think you know what you're talking about? I cannot understand for a moment.
Lack of social acceptance is a driving force behind trans youth committing suicide. And I'm asking you to explain why you feel it's appropriate to deny the existence of transgender people.
For a moment, it looks like Peterson has just met his match. The more she doubles down, the more he exposes the hollow scaffolding of her challenge. She frames his words as denying the existence of trans people, a claim designed not to invite debate, but to shut it down entirely. That's the move Peterson has warned about for years. Language used as a weapon to mark opponents as morally unfit before they can even speak. He responds with one of his sharpest lines of the evening.
I can't possibly imagine anybody sequencing a collection of questions more cliched, formulaic, and accusatory than the ones that you just managed. You don't have any idea about what you're talking about, and your confidence far exceeds your competence.
As if that wasn't enough, he shifts gears from personal pushback to cultural analysis.
I also don't know who educated you at this fine university, but they're doing a damn dismal job.
Peterson, I think one of the things at Oxford Union we welcome all kind of questions, and I think I would appreciate if the substance of what she's asking.
There was no substance. You can't answer the substance of a question when you're asked a question with no substance.
He doesn't dismiss gender dysphoria, but he does demand an honest reckoning with trend data. Is every case authentic, or is there a cultural current amplifying it? That question alone reframes the conversation away from moral outrage and into empirical territory.
Denying the existence of an entire community and comparing transgender people to participating in a sociological contagion.
They are participating in a sociological contagion, obviously. Why in the world do you think there's been an explosion in prevalence with regards to transgender identification among juvenile women? Why do you think that? Do you know that that's the pattern of social contagions for the last 350 years? Do you know it's always juvenile women? It was eating disorders, it was cutting, it was the eating disorders were anorexia and bulimia. In Freud's time, it was hysteria.
I take a lot of issue with you pretending to care about women as an avenue for perpetuating hate towards minority groups. You did this earlier in your conversation with the president, and you're doing it once more. But
you really are something.
What makes this moment intense isn't just the clash of views, it's the clash of strategies. The student relies on public shame. Peterson drags it back to analysis and evidence, but he does it with the kind of ferocity that makes the audience squirm. He refuses to let her hide behind buzzwords and emotional leverage. From here on, notice how Peterson widens his lens. He names the tactic for what it is: reputation savaging. That's the nuclear option in today's discourse, and Peterson's warning is clear. Once we allow accusations to replace arguments, there's no honest debate left. He even calls it a form of antisocial bullying, a phrase meant to strip away the moral halo and expose the maneuver for what it really is: status-seeking aggression dressed as virtue. That's what flips the room. He isn't just defending himself, he's putting the spotlight back on the tactic, forcing the audience to ask, are we watching a debate or a public attempt at character assassination?
An accusation of hate, particularly one that's formulated in that manner, that begins with the proposition that I was comparing transgender people to those who participated in satanic rituals, which is not at all what I said or meant on the Joe Rogan special, is not a question with substance. And that's for sure. It's not a question at all.
And the next student that comes up is going to ask a question that will literally give you jitters in your stomach. But before we get there, let's see what happened when a young lady in the crowd stood up to Peterson.
I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because I just don't, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Well, it's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal politely.
This was a classic Peterson exchange, the kind that starts with a smug jab, escalates quickly, and ends with the questioner looking shallow. The lady's question wasn't really a question at all. It was a challenge dressed up in concern. Climate catastrophe, economic collapse, a broken job market. And then the sneer. Beyond banal comments like clean your room, that last line revealed the game. It wasn't about climate or economics. It was about dismissing Peterson's philosophy in one swipe.
I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
Peterson immediately spotted the trap. He called it out, calmly but firmly. That's not a genuine question. It's a political statement. By doing this, he shifted the power dynamic, refusing to play defense on someone else's loaded terms. Then he did what he always does, cut straight to first principles.
What is your answer to
Do you think that you're worse off than
questions?
your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
Suddenly, the grand question about the planet was reframed as a personal reflection about gratitude and perspective.
And once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
When pushed back toward the collective responsibility line, Peterson laid down his sharpest point. Before you set out to save the world, you had better be sure you're capable of saving yourself. Climate protests too often become a mask for personal failure, a way of looking virtuous to peers while ignoring the chaos in one's own life. It wasn't a denial of collective action, but a warning. Individuals who can't manage their own flaws make reckless leaders.
Social action, I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
So, can I just to...
That's the gut punch. Peterson didn't deny climate change, but he stripped away the moral high ground from those who weaponize it without first taking responsibility. The lady wanted to corner him with the big problems. Instead, Peterson exposed the hollowness of posturing without personal discipline.
Peterson believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it. Do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay.
I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors.
But if you think that was genius, you've got to see how he dismantled this next student.
In your last interview with Stephen Barrett, you said one very important phrase, which is that...
With Stephen...
Bartlett.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
When you said that bad things happen when good men hold their tongue, it really struck me. And I think when I've had in an institution such as Oxford, where I had the optimism that I would come and be able to be very open about my views and thoughts, and I had realized that that is not entirely.
What made this Oxford Union moment hit so hard is that the student asked a practical question about surviving in a campus culture she thinks punishes dissent, and Peterson answered by flipping the lens. He refused the tactical frame. Instead of giving steps to dodge landmines, he asked what kind of person you become when you spend years learning to tiptoe.
So here's a definition of faith. Okay. Faith is the willingness to assume that no matter what happens to you, if you tell the truth, it's the best thing that could possibly happen to you. Now, this is a very weird thing to understand.
That shift alone undercut the premise. If the game requires silence, maybe the game is the problem, not your volume setting.
Now, the reason people lie or remain silent, there's two reasons. One is to gain an undeserved advantage, and the other is to escape a deserved punishment. And so people will lie and manipulate or remain silent to, you could say, to twist the fabric of reality so that it makes itself manifest to their benefit. But the question is, benefit by what standards and over what time frame? And so it's definitely the case that you can gain a temporary advantage by deception, but that doesn't mean that you're gaining a medium to long-term advantage.
He started by separating short-term wins from long-term consequences. You can keep your head down, say what gatekeepers want to hear, and collect small rewards. That works for a while, but it trains the habit of bending. Habits become character. This is the spine of his case.
And so then you might say, well, how do I play things out so that I balance short-term, medium-term, and long-term advantage optimally? And the answer to that is you say what you think. Right, and then there's all sorts of things that might happen, including the things that you just described, and it's also potentially the case that you might pay a price for in your career, but you got to ask yourself, do you want to walk down a career road to a destination that requires you to hold your tongue?
Then he attacked the comforting myth of deferred courage. Students tell themselves they will speak once the grade is secured. Graduates promise they will speak after the fellowship. Junior staff after promotion. The ladder goes on. His point is brutal because it is true. Boldness does not arrive with a job title. It grows through repetition, like any muscle. Wait for safety and you teach yourself fear. That is a direct hit on the anxious pragmatism baked into the question.
You're not popular because of what you say with people who might hire you. You might thank your lucky stars that they don't want you around, because you don't want to be anywhere near them. And if you do say what you have to say and someone comes along and says, you're just exactly the sort of person we're looking for, then you get to go and work with those people, and that means that you have a life that's actually yours instead of the life of whatever lie you happen to be telling for the sake of convenience. And so
it is practical in a deeper way. Speak plainly now and you filter in the opposite direction. The people who want you will find you. The ones who do not would have owned your time anyway. Better to discover that early than after you have traded years for a key to a room you hate.
less true than you might fear, even among relatively woke and ideologically corrupt professors. And then you're a graduate student and you think, well, I can't really say what I think because I haven't got a faculty position yet. And then you're a junior faculty member and you think, God, I'm not tenured, but when I'm tenured, I'll say what I think. And then you get tenured and you think, well, I'm not full professor yet. And then you're a full professor and you're a 35-year-old coward who hasn't said a true word in 20 years. And now you think all of a sudden, because you're secure, you're going to be brave. That's your theory of courage, is it? The more secure you get, the braver you'll be. Well, that's as stupid a theory of courage as you could possibly hope to develop. So start now and grow a hide, like a thick hide, and see what happens.
Notice the rhetorical structure. He gives the student agency instead of a victim script. You can choose truth and pay a price, or you can choose concealment and pay a different price. The second bill looks cheaper only because it is delayed. That is how he breaks the spell. The student asked for a method to keep both integrity and approval. He made it clear that the road forks.
Experience, And it's not only my experience, but my experience with the people I know is that I know lots of people who paid a price for abiding by their conscience, and a lot of them are riding pretty high at the moment, right? Things swung around in a remarkable way, and that tends to happen. Now, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you tell the truth and they shoot you, and that's the end of that.
That admission matters because it makes the argument feel adult. He is not selling hero myths. He is measuring outcomes over time. If reality eventually punishes fakery and rewards reliability, then truth is not only moral, it is strategic. You may take your lumps now, but you anchor to something that does not move under your feet.
You know, the truth is a long-term and profound game, and you got to decide if you're going to play it, and there'll be costs just like there are to everything. But if you're going to align yourself with anything in your life, you might as well align yourself with the truth, because then at least you have reality on your side, and that's a good deal as you're progressing forward.
Notice how he supplements the principle with patterns he has seen in academia and public life. People who resist the pressure often suffer first and gain later. People who accommodate win early and stall out as their voice withers. You do not need to accept his every example to see the mechanism. Systems change. Reputations harden. When the wind turns, the person who spoke clearly has a record, and the person who ducked has one too.
Take your lumps now and learn how to do it, and you'll be fortified optimally when you make your way out into the world.
The real dismantling is that he exposes the hidden contradiction in the student's position. She wants to be outspoken and safe. She wants institutions that dislike her views to hire her anyway. She wants a culture that punishes dissent to leave her untouched. That wish collapses once you examine incentives. If a place values conformity, your silence is the price of admission. If you pay it, you confirm its value. If you do not, keep yourself and lose the ticket. There is no third door.
I applied to graduate school. I wrote a very strange letter, and I did that on purpose. I told my potential advisor as clearly as I could exactly what I was like, for better or for worse. And there's no doubt that many people read that letter and thought there isn't a hope in hell that I'd give that guy an interview, but the person I did end up working with read the letter and thought, that's just the person I'm looking for. And I had a great relationship with him. I still work with him. It's 45 years later.
What Peterson does is reframe faith as a practical bet. Assume telling the truth leads to the best possible outcome over time. Not because the world is kind, but because alignment with reality compounds. That is an argument about how to live, not how to win a panel. And that is why the moment landed. He did not swat the student. He dissolved the logic that kept her stuck. By the end, the smart play no longer looked like hiding. It looked like speaking and taking the consequences on purpose. That is how her position was dismantled. He removed its exit routes.
Then the life you have isn't yours. The life you have is the life of the spirit of the lie. And if that's the life you want, then go ahead and lie with silence or with commission. But if you want your life, then tell the truth. Your truth is you. And the life you have, if you tell the truth, is your life. Well, what possible threat would be sufficient to entice you to give that